Hey, here we are again, another session on 252, and on this one we're going to look at Jesus grew in stature. Now, the word stature there points to the idea of physical maturity. So in its normal context, that's what it means. But we're looking at this idea of physical maturity in the context of Jesus growing. Now, I don't want to push this too far, and I don't want to stretch it beyond its meaning, but does this suggest to us that Jesus was deliberate and intentional in growing in stature? Remember, we've talked about this idea that to grow here is to grow deliberately, to grow intentionally. And in fact, the way the word's used, it also means to grow continuously. So if we put those two ideas together of physical maturity and Jesus growing intentionally, does it suggest to us that Jesus, God in flesh, took his physicality seriously? Now, I know that opens us up for maybe some raised eyebrows or maybe people suggesting that I'm pushing that a wee bit too far. But I want you to work with me on this, because we've no problem thinking about Jesus growing in wisdom as a rabbi. So why don't we think about Jesus growing physically or in stature as a man? Now, often when we think of Jesus, and some of this is influenced by Renaissance art and all sorts of images like that, Jesus is often presented almost as a man, quite effeminately, or he's presented as someone who looks a little bit weak, someone who probably wouldn't get very far in a very robust first century world. Yet the evidence of the Gospels suggests absolutely the opposite of that. In fact, if we had a little bit of a glance at Jesus' world, for example, it was a brutal world, a world of very low life expectancy, a world where people had to work very, very, very hard just to stand still and to survive. It was a world where the rich got richer and the poor tended to get poorer. That's the world of Jesus, a very polarized, physically demanding and difficult world. We look at Jesus' job. A tekton. We tend to think of him as a carpenter, but he was probably more than a carpenter. He was probably a carpenter and a stonemason, a sort of a general outstanding craftsman. And if you look at Israel geographically and you look at Jesus' world economically, that makes total sense that he would be able to work with wood and with stone. Well, hey, if you're going to be a tekton, you got to have some strength. You got to be able to work long days and put the hours in if you're going to survive and if you're going to achieve anything. We could look at the fasting of Jesus. I mean, Jesus fasts for 40 days and 40 nights. I've had the privilege of being to the wilderness area where we suspect Jesus spent most of his time when he fasted. It is baking hot in the day. It is freezing cold at night. And Jesus goes through a wilderness experience of physical endurance for 40 days and 40 nights, as well as the spiritual warfare that he undertakes in that position. We could look at the death and sufferings of Jesus. My goodness, his physical endurance over a 36-hour period of being crisscrossed across Jerusalem, the beatings that he undertakes, and the fact that he hangs on the cross for 6 hours before dying is truly, truly amazing. But one of the areas I want to have a little bit of fun with is his journeys. And actually, although Israel is a relatively small country, about 150 miles top to bottom and about 70 miles east to west, remember Jesus, wherever he went in his world, he would walk. He didn't float. He didn't fly. He would walk. And some of the journeys are quite remarkable. So, for example, Jesus grew up in Nazareth, but he made his sort of northern headquarters in Israel when he started his ministry was in Capernaum. From Nazareth to Capernaum, depending on which way you go, it's somewhere between 25 and 40 miles. It's an incredible journey. And in fact, Nazareth is in a valley. You have to go up and down to get to Nazareth. And if you walk from Capernaum to Nazareth, it's uphill the whole way in very, very difficult terrain. So we read the Bible and it says, and Jesus went to Capernaum from Nazareth. And we sort of think it's just a little walk around the corner. That's like a 25 to 30, maybe 40 mile journey. Jesus goes from Capernaum to Jerusalem. Do you know that's somewhere, depending on which route he took, that's somewhere between 85 and 100 miles. It's an amazing journey. I worked out one of Jesus' ministry journeys from Capernaum up to Tyre and Sidon, across to Mount Hermon, back down to Capernaum, across to the Decapolis and back to Capernaum. I reckon that's like 200 to 250 mile journey. And he's doing all of that on foot. Now, why am I saying all of that? Because that seems to suggest that Jesus was physically capable to do those sorts of things. Now, here's the lazy answer again. The lazy answer to all of that is, well, that's because he's God and God's perfect and God's powerful. Absolutely, we hear that. But we're back to Dr. Luke, who seems to be suggesting to us that Jesus grew as a man, which means actually Jesus is making decisions in those 18 years of growth between being 12 and 30 when he begins his ministry, where he is taking his physicality seriously. He understands, if I'm going to achieve the purpose of God for my life, I must take my physical development seriously. Now, how he did that, I can't say. It would be total guesswork to look at that. But what we do know, what we do understand, and the evidence points to, is that Jesus was fairly fit. He was a pretty fit man. And therefore, it might suggest he took his physical development seriously. So, John, what's your point? Well, my point is this. Out of that, we maybe want to take the challenge that God is asking us to be people who think about being fit for purpose. We're not just talking about being fit for fitness sake or just being like super healthy because that's a good idea. And that is a good idea. But actually, even as Christians, we're thinking about being physically able in order to do the purpose of God for my life. And if we can think about our physicality in that regard, it might just transform our attitude to our physicality. So often we think about our physicality as something separate from who I am as a follower of Jesus. Maybe Luke 2:52 allows us to look at our physicality as part of our followership of Jesus. When we think about growing in stature, one of the things we're not emphasizing is our waist size. What I want to emphasize is our well-being. And I want to really, really encourage you with this thought that growing in stature, growing in our physicality is not about how thin I am or how I look. It is about how well I am. Because here's what I've learned. If I am physically well within the parameters of the life I've been given, then it gives me every opportunity to serve God as effectively as I possibly can. And of course, if I have been blessed, if John Andrews has been blessed with good health, then I must take seriously looking after that good health, because that is part of my responsibility as a steward before God. Now, that doesn't mean if people are unable physically to do certain things, or even if they have a disability physically, that bars them from serving God. Of course it doesn't. What we're talking about is this, that whatever your physicality is, you are committed to looking after it as well as possible so that you can serve God. So it's not waist size, it's well-being. It's not just getting fit because that's a good idea. It's getting fit because of the purpose of your life. And all of those things can be really, really important. So let me land these ideas practically for you. Let me use the word strong and break down just 6 ideas really quickly for you that you can think about, reflect on, and discuss in your session together. Here's the first idea in strong, and it's this. Spirituality includes your physicality. It's a really important idea. I grew up in a world where being involved in sport or doing anything physical was almost frowned upon as a Christian. And I believe that was a mistake. Even though Paul says bodily exercise is of little value in comparison to godly spirituality, he doesn't rule it out. He doesn't say it's not a good idea. He just says in comparison to your spiritual well-being, it's a lesser issue. But it's not a non-issue. And that's the thing. So what this idea of 252 allows you to do is bring your physicality into your spirituality. I love what Nelson says. He says, spirituality that isn't 24/7 is just hollow religion, a segregated component of a non-integrated person. Love that idea. It's a bit of a mouthful, but if you will break that down, that's just brilliant thinking. And what Nelson is essentially saying is that every part of our world needs to be brought into our spirituality. And this has really helped me. I have brought my physicality into my spirituality. So for me, it is as important to think about how I treat myself physically as it is how I pray and read my Bible, even though they are very different things. So the first idea is that spirituality includes your physicality. Here's the second idea, and it picks up on this fitness idea, that we're called to maybe train on purpose for purpose. Now, what we mean by that is that this whole idea of, if I'm going to look after myself physically, then actually I need to have a reason to do it, and a good reason, not just like a holiday reason, not just a New Year's resolution reason, but a big life reason. And that's been really important to me. My understanding of God's purpose for my life has helped me take my physical well-being much more seriously. Let me say this to you. I'll put it this way. If our because is strong enough, the becoming is inevitable. A great friend of mine, David Shearman, used to say to me, we need a because in order to become. And that's a beautiful idea. You need a cause to become. And so if we can bring into our world a cause that's related to our service for God, that allows me to bring legitimacy into my physical well-being, because my physicality is serving my spirituality. Here's the third thing: rest and recreate. So if we're going to be strong, we need to be people who rest and recreate. What do we mean by that? We mean we need to be people who are constantly replenishing our world. I love what Jesus says to his disciples in the middle of an incredible ministry trip. He says, "Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest." If you break that verse down, Mark chapter 6, verse 31, here's 4 great ideas for you. Rest is spiritual. Jesus says, "Come with me." Have a think about that. I think that rest is relational. He says, "Come with me by yourselves." He talks about the fact that also rest is emotional. Come with me to a quiet place. And then he says that rest, I think, is physical. Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest. And I love those ideas: spiritual, emotional, physical. The idea is that actually rest is not just something I do from work, but rest is part and parcel of my life. I would really love you to reflect on those ideas in the context of rest. And we need to do that if we're going to be strong. Fourthly, order your time. How important is that? We've touched on this idea already on wisdom. We've got to make time for our physicality. If we don't make time for rest, if we don't make time for recreation, then actually it simply won't happen. It will be gobbled up. And when we come later on to talk about making a plan for our lives, that's one of the things we've got to look at. Next one is nutrition matters, N. And that's really, really important. Think about this: what you eat, when you eat it, how much you eat, and why you eat. Nutrition's incredibly important. I'm not a nutritional expert, and I would encourage you to take advice on it. But here's what I've discovered: that probably, this is anecdotal, 90% of my physical well-being is probably what I put in my mouth. So I can be trying to keep myself fit, but if I'm abusing my body by the way I eat or don't eat, or the sort of things I do eat, then that's hurting me in the long run. Take that seriously as an idea. And then here's the final one: grow strong connections. Actually, I've discovered this idea that when I'm in a world that is committed to these ideas, when I'm around people who believe these things, when I grow those sorts of connections that actually affirm these ideas, do you know what? It helps me to be better. It helps me to be stronger. It helps me to engage in those areas. And real research has been done on the fact that when I'm surrounded in an environment of positive and life, actually it helps me to grow stronger, quicker, and better. So why don't you have a think about that? Jesus grew in stature. Jesus was fit for purpose. Jesus was able to do what the Father called him to do. Perhaps that's a challenge and an inspiration to us that we need to be men and women who grow deliberately in our physical well-being and in our stature. Hey, it's been a pleasure. Until next time, see you soon.